All right, welcome back to another PCBH Corner. I'm super excited to be joined for the second time by Chris Hunter. And it's interesting. I didn't tell you this, Chris. I went back and I rewatched the one video. I think something got messed up with the formatting in the one video, like you're like sideways and stuff. So I'm glad that we're actually able to do this right this time.
Yeah.
As well as just diving in some new topics that are different from the ones that we talked about first. So the one thing that I wanted to make sure, we always like to do introductions. Chris, I don't think you need an introduction by any means. Whenever I talk to new trainees or we even give presentations, my one of the first things I always say is like Chris Hunter was the first book I ever read about PCBH, and I still remember meeting Chris for the first time at a conference and being like starstruck and just different things. I just am so grateful for how gracious you've always been with your time and including us on things. So, but do you want to? I think the one thing that might be helpful is one, I don't know if a lot of people know that you're retired right now. And maybe even discussing, if you would, whatever you feel comfortable with, what even your progression of your career was within the DoD, because there were so many different levels, so many different things. And then at the end, like you were like, I don't know, I felt like you were like the president of the United States as far as the things that you had control over. So yeah, just like an introduction, kind of career trajectory and what you're doing now.
Well, thanks for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and I think what I'm calling it now is preferment instead of retirement. So preferment being that I have the ability to pick and choose and do whatever I want to do in my work or other kind of life. And so I know that's Nancy Ruddy introduced me to that term. I'd never heard of it. I thought, well, that's a good term. That's different because it's not like I'm not doing things anymore. I'm still trying to figure out what my next step is. But my trajectory has been I'm a clinical health psychologist by training, and my career started in the United States Air Force. I mean, I did my psychology internship there, and I was in the Air Force for 10 years. Doing both specialty behavioral health and behavioral medicine, and transferring over into doing the primary care behavioral health. And I spent 10 years in the Air Force and then got out and continued that career and had started working in a naval, the U.S. Navy psychology internship, again, starting their integrated primary care behavioral health program. And then I got the opportunity to go work for the military health system, and they wanted me to launch their integrated behavioral health and primary care program. So starting from the very beginning. So I had the chance to go and have a uniformed services career as a U.S. Public Health Services officer. So all the benefits of being in the military, but with not having kind of the downside of having to move around all the time. And so what they brought me in to do was really to start this from the ground up. And I was able to, with the help of really smart people and great teammates, to be able to come to an agreement between Army, Navy, and Air Force on what is integrated behavioral health and primary care. How are we going to define that? How are we going to staff it? How are we going to fund it with new funding that's not just pulling from something else? And then the military health system, I ended up going into what's now called the Defense Health Agency. And so being able to have a team, and what I was able to do from like 2008 to 2022, which is when I stopped working there and took my retirement, I was able to do a lot of things. So we standardized training, we standardized the electronic health record, we rolled out clinical pathways. We had expert trainers. We had standards for if you're going to come in and do this, here are the clinical core competencies we want you to have. We had the ability to go into our electronic health record and kind of pull data out. So kind of from soup to nuts. I mean, it was kind of cool kind of being on the ground level to be able to do that, but then you also have to do that. And so I think I've learned along the way that, it's important to pay attention to the overall system, that you have to get people to come together, that you have to get all the different parts of the system to work: finance, electronic health record, training, your ability to accurately put funding where it needs to go. How do you have the right hiring? I mean, just simple stuff like, is your statement of work for hiring a BHC, is it accurate? You know, if it's not accurate and somebody comes on board and they think they're going to do one thing and they're doing something else, well, they look to quit as soon as possible. So I've had, from boots on the ground work with what are you doing in your clinic to kind of high level work with what are we going to do for our policy, what are our standards, how are we going to hold people accountable. It's really been kind of, I think, I feel very grateful to be able to have had those experiences. And now I'm to a point where, like I said, I'm in preferment and I've made that transition and I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to go. And so I want to be able to take all of those experiences and maybe work with other health systems or clinics on that either want to start or expand what they're doing, and how can I assist with that from really all of that, from your policy to your training to your electronic health record, and how can we do that in a way that looks at population health and looks at getting better outcomes, and how can we get value for our services? Are we using our funds wisely, and how can we get good patient and provider satisfaction? How can we avoid some of that? You put out something recently on provider burnout with your spouse, and so how can we have people have joy in their work? And that requires, I think, time and effort and commitment. And what I'm seeing more and more is that leadership, and when I say leadership at multiple levels, from your providers to your mid-level management to the people that make the final calls, they all have to be on board with this, or else the system wants to go back to what it used to be.
It almost naturally does, right? Like it's almost like this, like just going back to homeostasis constantly. Like you're constantly fighting
Right.
against that homeostasis, like retraction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're not continuing to plan and move forward, the system wants to suck you back to what it was. And that, that takes work and effort. And
Damn
if you
right.
don't have happy employees who have value in their work, it's a cliche, but every system is designed to get the result that it's getting. And if you want to get a different result, you need to, I think you need to look at the different parts of the system and where are your leverage points where you can start to change that system and maintain that change. And that's a challenge.
Dude, here's the thing. I wrote down like 5 things. This corner is going to be like an hour long, but we'll try to make it efficient. The one thing that I wanted to ask, very very quickly is not the right word, but I just want to pause on it as you were describing like this career. That moment you discussed, like when the people came to you and said, "Hey, you're going to try to start like the integrated care within the DoD." One, my mind's just curious, like, what the hell was that like? Like, what was that? Like, was that scary? Was that like difficult? And then for people, because a lot of times, and I know people have reached out to you for this, people reach out to me for this. It's like, hey, we're starting integrated care. Where do I begin? Like, is there anything that you would suggest, like looking back on that moment, be like, hey, we did this well, or I wish I would have done this at that time when we were first starting?
So it was an honor, and it was exhilarating, and it was also super scary because I was it. It was me. I had
Dude.
to I had to bring all these people together. I had to take what was being done differently in Army, Navy, and Air Force and bring all these people together. And so, and so, I think I had the experience of I know how to do a PCBH model in primary care. I had the experience in the military. I know how the system works. I know what the bureaucracy is. And I think part of kind of getting started, I think is, to your other question is, if you want to start an integrated behavioral health service, whether that is a pure PCBH model or a hybrid model, or taking different functional pieces from different models and applying them to get the results you want in your system. One, I think you need to have somebody who's a lead and dedicated to do that. I think that person needs to be able to bring all the players on board. So it's not just about clinicians. I think you need to bring in whoever the behavioral health people are. You need to bring in the various members of your primary care team, because you're going to be one member of a team and you want them to be completely on board. So as we were bringing in these committees to do these policies and how we're going to do this, we had social workers, psychologists, family medicine docs, PAs, nurse practitioners. We had the equivalent of what would be a medical assistant. We had psychiatrists. We had prescribing so we had anybody who could be a player in primary care were part of these developmental teams. And I think you also need to figure out who on leadership needs to be educated on this. And whoever your lead is, they need to educate themselves, not just on their profession, but know your electronic health record. Know your payment systems. If you don't know your payment systems, learn them. Learn what's important to primary care. What do they value? How are you going when you're starting to, if you want to integrate behavioral health services in primary care, you need to sell it to them. You know, what do they want to buy? How are you going to make their life better, along with the, you know, the quadruple aim that we were talking about before? And I think you can also have co-leads, but you need to have at least one person who can go into all of these different areas. So, you know, that was a bit of a learning curve for me. So I had been sort of in my early military career, I had been sort of gotten up to what I'd call mid-level management. Well, I never kind of dealt with the people that were admirals and generals and, you know, the equivalent of what you might call your executive suite people. And that was a different kind of skill set, and kind of learning what's your sales pitch. You need to be able to tell, you need to, I think you need to be able to have a little bit of data, and you need to have some stories, and you need to be able to pitch that sale so that the people that can say, yes, do this, this is important, it fits with our mission and our values, and this is a valuable service that we're willing to put time, effort, and money into. You need to get their buy off. And you need to be able to resell that over and over and over again. It's like a recurring advertisement until they can sing the jingle on their own. And it never underestimate how little people will remember about what you're doing. It's just a constant message feed, because that's been my experience.
I don't think we talk about that a lot, right? Like we almost like present this as a thing like, hey, give one presentation to one group of people and just expect them to, like, they're going to understand it. And the other thing that there's so many different things I love what you said. The one thing I really, really love what you said is it's not just about presenting data indiscriminately. It's like you need to know what drives the people that you're presenting to. Like, hey, if you talk about, I don't know what would be a thing. If you talk about handoffs, right? We love handoffs. Handoffs sound great. But if you're talking to an administrator where they could care less about a handoff, like, well, tell me why a handoff matters. Like, what does that, like, I loved how you said it's not only presenting data in stories, it's making sure it reflects what the other people are interested in.
Yeah, I mean, the different people have different glasses on. So you need to be able to put something in front of them that's meaningful to them, that they can see, and that they can say, well, of course. I mean, who wouldn't want that? I absolutely want to do that. And I think, you know, if you look at the advertising world, that's what they're really good at. They figure out, what do people want? How do I need to put this in front of them? So they say, of course I need to go right out and buy that. And I need to buy a lot of them, and I need to keep doing that because it's going to make my life better. And I think, you know, when people get reinforced for what they do, they continue to engage in those behaviors, right? And what's reinforcing can be different to different people in the system. And it's not an either or. I think it can be an and. It can be multiple things can be important when you're integrating behavioral health services into a system. And I think figuring out within that system, for the different people that need to be involved and need to move forward as a system and as a team, what's important to them, and highlighting the importance of how this change is going to fit with their values, what they want for their system, what they want for their team, and how they want to be able to walk out of clinic that day or walk out of the executive suite and say, you know what I'm doing matters. It's important, and it makes a difference to people. that's typically, if you can figure out how to pitch that and pitch it in a way that's honest and real, I think that's part of the key in establishing and maintaining a good system of health services.
Chris, and I don't want to put something out there that you're not going to want to do, but and I know you're looking at like building up, like trying to help other systems. The one thing if people are watching this, I think one of the things that is so great is to get mentorship and coaching from people. And if people are watching this and, what my mind's doing is like, oh my God, this is brilliant, all this stuff, like reach out to Chris about this because I think this is such a big thing that it's tough to see like when you're in the moment, like it's so difficult. And even as you were saying about like, hey, you need to know your EHR, you need to know all these different things. It's almost impossible to sometimes do that by yourself. Getting mentorship and coaching from someone that's been through that to really guide you. I don't know. Again, I don't want to put that out there if you don't want that out there, but it's going to be out there now anyway. Reach out to Chris about this to get that mentorship, that coaching, obviously for some fees for it, but it's something that is vital, I think, for the process to people to build up.
Yeah, I think, I'm happy to have people contact me, and I'm happy to engage in email. And if there's anything that kind of is further, then we can talk about, what that might be. But there are now, I think, a lot of good, there are consultants that I think specialize in different things. I mean, I think I have, not, I think I have the clinical piece, but I also have this bigger kind of larger system piece because I worked in a system that had, I mean, I was ultimately responsible for everything we've discussed in over 300 primary care clinics. When I had a whole team of people that were responsible for standards and EHR movement. But I mean, there are a lot of people out there that have a lot of skill to be able to help people to be a mentor. I mean, yourself and your spouse. We've got people like Patty Robinson. If you go and there's, the CFHA website, if you'll go there, they provide technical assistance as well and can draw and can pick from different experts. And so, this isn't something you have to do on your own. And,
Amen.
what frustrates me, one of the things that, and I get this, that I'll go to a conference and I'll meet people and they'll be excited and I'll say, yeah, shoot me an email. We'll have the discussion. I'd be happy to talk with you about this. And then nobody ever, I don't get any emails from people. And it's like, just email me. I think, I get that, when you're at a conference, you're not working and momentum's different, but I think sometimes people are intimidated to reach out to people that they've seen at conferences before. And my personal experience as a young professional, and what I've seen as I've gotten older, is that most people that are in positions like you're in or that I'm in are happy to talk with other
Couldn't agree
people.
more.
They're not necessarily looking to charge you for every minute. I mean, at some point, if it becomes,
Right.
like hours and hours, there has to be a cutoff there. But it's like, send me an email. Let's have a phone call. I mean, part of what I find value in is I want to be able to help people make a difference. And if I can take my work and my life experience and help people make a difference, or even help them get to, I'm not the right person for you, let me get you to this person. I mean, that's part of what I value in life. I mean, it makes me happy. I mean,
Chris,
how can we make a difference in other people's lives? I mean, it's great.
and I couldn't agree more with that. And I think the thing that, I know how it was for me, like even like emailing you for the first time or meeting you for the first, I think it is intimidating, right? It's like, man, this is the guy that wrote the book. Like, I'm just gonna reach out to this guy and email. And I so appreciate you saying that because it is one of those things like, yeah, it's gonna be intimidating. Our minds are gonna do all these different things. And hearing you say that, I think that is going to help a lot of people be like, hey, I'm going to follow up actually after this conference. Let me ask you this. What do you think looking back? You talked about some of them, it seems like right now. What has been the most surprising thing, or one of the most surprising things, like when you look back on the decades that you've dedicated to this and the programs that you've built, as you said, overseeing 300 clinics, is there something that, like, man, this surprised me as PCBH has evolved, as it's to, and it could be for the good, it could be for the bad. Anything that really stands out, like, this surprised me. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I think, on the downside, one of the things that I think surprised me, which probably shouldn't have been a surprise, is even if you have a really good idea and even if it makes sense, just how hard it is to start something and maintain it and keep it going. I mean, people come in and out, leadership changes, people have different ideas about what they want. And, the stuff that the system or leadership or the team was 100% on board with 3 years ago, now you're
Mm.
having to do the exactly the same. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And that to me, I think was surprising. I mean, something that seems obvious to me isn't necessarily obvious to other people, which I think goes back to that constant sales pitch.
Mm.
The constant, as you're having like the executive suite people come in, how do you do onboarding with them so that they know what you're doing, exactly what that is, why it's consistent? When you have your staff coming on board to a clinic, having onboarding with them, if we're talking PCBH model, have that BHC talk to them. What is this? How is it useful? Talk to your colleague about what has transpired here. So, I mean, that was just me, I think, having unreasonable expectations. On the flip side of that, what I think has
Can I
been
pause?
really
Can I pause you
cool.
real quick? Keep where
Oh,
your mind's going. Keep where your mind's going. Because the one thing,
yeah.
the things that you said there, and it was so validating even for me to hear this, and like a constant reminder of like, I remember Jeff. I don't know if Jeff Ryder came up with this quote, but I'll give him credit for it. He said, "Primary care is where good ideas go to die." And it's this idea of like it's not personal. It's not
Nope.
like, and we could get so frustrated about that, right? It's like, why am I explaining this? How do I have to go over this again with you? And just knowing that, like, hey, that is what it is. Like, and almost embracing that, like, and almost being intentional, be proactive with that, like continuously say it. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, um, there was, I mean, when I was doing full-time clinical work, I'd go around to all the providers in the clinic and I'd do the BHC special of the month. Here's, insomnia, send me your insomnia patients. So, and I would sit down with all the providers. I'd have a one pager. Here are all the things I can help you with. I'd go to them. Here's my one special of the month. Here's what I can do. Please send me all your patients. Well, it was about a year later after I'd done all of this where I had a provider say, "Oh, you can help me with people that are obese or overweight." It's like, I sure can. I'd be
Sure
happy to
can.
see all of those people. That person had received that message multiple times,
Multiple
and it was
times.
like an epiphany to them that, oh, you can help me with my people that are struggling with losing weight. And so that's just a real world example of, you know, it's hard. I mean, primary care, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is challenging. People are working hard. They're pulled multiple directions. They have limited time to focus on things that aren't right immediately in front of what they need to do. And it's not just the primary care team. It's all the other people that are supporting that team. It's your executives. It's your people that are making those final decisions about what's going to get funded, what's not going to get funded. So yeah, and then let me go back to your other point about what has been unexpected in like a good way, is to see, I think, how we still have a long way to go. And I was discussing this with Patty Robinson. I think we had a little bit of she was, I think, a little bit more optimistic than I was. But I think what I've seen over the last 20 years was how integrated care as a general umbrella topic and integrated behavioral health has become more and more standardized, normalized. This is something that we expect. There are multiple forums, there are multiple experts. When we did the first edition of our book, there was no book out there when I started doing this. When I started working in the clinic I started doing integrate, what is essentially was a PCBH model in 2000. And I'd got my hands on all the articles I could get. There was nothing out there like that. I mean, and that's why we wrote our book. It's like, I don't want to have to guess at this. I want a recipe book where I can go and say, what questions do I need to ask? What are the evidence-based interventions? And so that has come a long way. I think there are lots of great resources out there for clinicians. I think we need to maybe put more out there. I know Sandy Blunt's doing some of this more with the how do you do the management piece? How do you for which is a different skill set. And so I think this is not as shocking to people. I think I think that it still is brand new to some people. So I think kind of like anything, it takes time to progress and go out. And so I would have liked the progression to have gone faster, but when I kind of look at kind of where we are, it's very different than it was 20 years ago. I mean, EHRs have been kind of a game changer in terms of being able to standardize things and collect data. I think we have a lot of people out there that know a variety of different models that have evidence-based to them, and how can you work those? There are people you can go to. There's not just, 4 consultants you can go to that can help you out with this. There are many consultants that you can go to that can help you out with this. And so I think it's easier to do this. And so I think that's one of the things that I've really liked in this progression. I wish it has gone faster, but I think that's where we are. And I think we've got a lot of smart, energetic individuals who are continuing to work this. And I mean, integrated behavioral health and primary care is just one piece. I mean, we could probably take any piece of primary care. So if you want to integrate a PharmD into primary care, or you want to integrate a physical therapist into primary care, they're going to run into the same system problems.
Amen.
It's the same thing.
That's interesting to think about, like even trying to generalize some of those things with it. I was at a presentation at CFHA that actually talked about that they were integrating their clinical pharmacist within the team, and how much of the same principles generalized, right? Like the same thing. It was a really fascinating moment of being like, oh yeah, like this isn't about integrating behavioral health solely. This is about just integration across the board of multiple professionals and multiple disciplines within primary care.
Well, yeah, and I think, I don't want to get too far into this, but you could even go into a sports analogy. If you have a sports team, you're going to bring these different players to this team that have different skill sets. How are you going to pay for them? How are they going to work together? What kind of offense are you going to run? Why would you run that offense? Is the coach, are they talking with the owner? Are they all on the same page? I mean,
it's a good metaphor.
If you look at any system, there are multiple pieces that you have to look at the same time and figure out, are they working in a way that is going to get you to what your goal is? And do we all agree on what the goal is? Because if you have different ideas about what the goal is, or if you have somebody who's super skilled, you have the best wide receiver, but they don't get along with the team. It's great that they have the skills, but how can we get them to play with the team? And if not, maybe they're not the best fit for where we want to go, right?
Let me ask you this.
Okay, I'll stop with the sports stuff.
And again, I think it's a brilliant metaphor. And again, especially about even the thing about, you could have the most skilled person, but if it's not part of the team, like, we've seen that over and over through sports. It just doesn't work out. Let me ask you this. And this might be a quick question, because I think your mind's going to be, no, duh, like, why would we not do this? But I'm interested to see about the kind of maybe philosophy even more behind it. If people haven't heard about the onboarding that the DoD does with new BHCs, it is not just impressive, like it is, I don't know, phenomenal, exhaustive, it is. And to the point, like, you even have checks, right? It's like, hey, if you don't get to these competency levels, like, you're not progressing past this. It's a brilliant kind of setup. I guess the question in my mind goes to, what caused you in the department to be like, this is non-negotiable. Like, not only like we have to invest so much money, time into getting people trained up, and you're not moving past this if you don't get the competencies that you need.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And my mind immediately goes to quality control.
Huh.
So and we primarily had in our system psychologists and social workers as behavioral health consultants. If you're a licensed social worker and psychologist, this doesn't mean that you have the skill set to work effectively in primary care. And we get that, most universities, that's changing somewhat, but most universities don't train people to work effectively in primary care. So we're going to have to help you do this. And we're confident that most people, most of the time, can learn how to do this. So we set up, online didactics, asynchronous. We want you to read these materials on evidence-based assessment and practice. We want you to see these videos on what this might look like. We're going to have you come. We used to do it in person, but they're doing it virtually now, which I think is still as effective. We're going to evaluate you on core competencies. Here are the core competencies we're going to evaluate you on. You need to be able to demonstrate to our expert trainers that you meet a minimum level of this, because with simulated patients, and so we had a whole list of kind of scenarios for patients and professional actors that would come and play those patients. And we're going to spend a couple of days where you're going to observe other people that are being trained, and you're going to do patient simulations. And our expert trainer is going to give you feedback on core competencies. And if you can't meet minimum core competencies after we've given you all of this time to read about it, understand it, observe it, and provide you the feedback, if you can't do it in a simulated situation, you cannot see patients in primary care, because it's going to be even harder than it is now. And unfortunately, we would have both social workers and psychologists who could not pass the core competencies. And I mean, it was really a quality check. And we
And Chris,
had,
I'm going
it
to
was,
pause you real quick. Keep where
yeah,
your mind's going. I want people to hear what Chris just said and not gloss over this. Literally, you would not allow them to progress
they
towards the
could,
clinical work.
they couldn't work in primary care. I
Yeah.
mean, they could go work somewhere else in that clinic. I mean, in our system, it was a bit of a disconnect, because each primary care clinic, wherever they were, they had local authority to
Yeah.
hire, but they relied on us to, is this person good? And our expert trainers would have to have talks with the supervisor or the clinical lead on, nope, this person couldn't meet these core competencies. Here's why we do this. And we'd make recommendations on how they would go from there. Either that, in the very rare circumstance, we can give this person some more mentorship and training and see how they do. And then, or we don't think this person's going to be able to meet it in primary care, and you'll have to decide what to do. Maybe you can shift their job to specialty mental health, which they may be like outstanding at. Not everybody is set up to be a good player for primary care. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but I'll lay it out there. If you can't run fast, I can teach you running technique, and I can give you all the coaching, and you might be able to improve your speed a little bit, but you're never going to be a fast runner. You don't have that skill set. So let's highlight the skill sets that you have. And so some people just aren't good fits for primary care.
And
With
I
that,
think this is a really big part, especially with the landscape, because and I'm sure you do too. I talk to directors all the time. It's like, hey, they're just like, we need to hire people, and it really just almost turns into this like, we'll take anybody, right? Like, we'll just take anybody to put in here. And Bridget and I have been so appreciative of your all's approach, because what we try to do at CHCW, I mean, we've tried to really mirror that in a lot of ways, starting even from our initial phone call. And I had this one this morning talking to someone, be like, you got to make sure you want to do this work. Like we try to convince you not to do this at the beginning, because
right.
we don't want to have those fights. And then our onboarding is so standardized and so structured, largely based off what you all have done, because of that reality. Like, it can't be just like, hey, we'll just take anybody, because it won't have the ripple of what we think that quality control.
Yeah, and that quality control also extended to, okay, now you've passed what we would call phase one. You've demonstrated in a simulated that you can meet these core competencies. We're going to give you an expert trainer who's going to be your mentor and is going to talk with you over the next month and a half. And then what we want to do is we want to observe other core competencies that we can't really evaluate until you're in the clinic with real patients and being able to observe, okay, now what does that look like? We're still going to rate you on your initial phase 1 core competencies because it's not like we forget about those.
Right.
And, sometimes, that fades somewhat. If you can demonstrate it in a simulated environment, you might have more of a challenge doing that in a real environment with real patients and real interruptions and an electronic health record. And so, we tried to set up that quality control so that, we know the local people, they're not going to be experts in this, so how can we help them? How can we be the experts for them, give our stamp of approval, watch them in their clinic, and be a resource for that BHC as well as their clinic leadership for any questions that come up. And so that trying to provide that support, and that can become a challenge because, primary care clinics, at least in our system, could be understaffed, overworked, burned out, and so they're kind of barely keeping their head above water. And while this might be important if it was in a perfect world, people are too busy putting out fires. And so, having a centralized kind of expert team has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks as well.
And again, and I love, and this is, I'm always thinking about like viewers and stuff like, and I always, again, this is selfish of me, I guess, or foolish of me, because I could be wrong about this, or my mind could be wrong about this. But this is, I think, a pausing point for people to go back and maybe even listen to what Chris was just saying there. And like some of the different things, like, are we going to be able to, and thinking about what's going to be realistic to be able to do. The one thing that you said, though, like, not only having a specific onboarding that we want to be intentional with, having mentorship throughout those initial months, maybe that initial year. Like Bridge and I, we're still amazed. We used to say it took a year for a BHC to actually do the things that we think that now, honestly, our data is kind of suggesting it might take 3 years to do that. That could also maybe be a limit of like our ability to actually train in an effective way. And regardless, though, there's the time that there still needs to be mentorship. There still needs to be conversations. How are you doing about this? Are you drifting back to homeostasis versus expanding and continuing with the model? I loved how much you said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's an ongoing development. And I think if I ever meet, somebody who's a BHC and they think that they know everything about everything, I become concerned.
It's worrisome.
Mean, when I was doing this full time in the clinic, there would be patients that I'd end up seeing and they'd walk out the door and I'd say, man, that was terrible. Don't do that again. Okay, this is a learning opportunity for you. How are you going to do that differently? And so no matter how good you get, there
Amen.
are times with patients or with staff where it's like, well, I face planted on that one. Let me pick myself up, dust myself off. And if I'm in that situation again, how would I do it differently so I might get a different outcome? So it's an ongoing process, not only I think with the individuals, but also with any team or with any system, looking at all the pieces, knowing that it's constant. I was going to say upkeep and maintenance, but that's wrong. It's constant development, I think, is what it is.
Let me ask you this, because I think this is a good transition as we wrap up to talking about the third edition that's coming out. And again, I think we talked about this on the first corner. The thing that I found so incredible, I mean, Bridge and I would have read the book in what would have been 2010 or 2011. The first book came out in, what was it, 07 or 09? Or 05? When did that come out?
Gosh, that's a good question. I should know this. I think it was 07.
I think you're right. So I remember going through this, and the one thing that it helps so much with as just a new person, and I reference still back to it regularly, and even use your handout still that are part of the PDFs with that is it really improved my 3 C's, my comfort, my confidence, and my competence to go into these rooms where it's just like I don't know what to do in this situation. Like maybe I don't have the
Right.
experience with maybe this third edition that's coming out now. What's new about it? What have you all added to? What are you excited about? What tell us? Like what's this third edition? What can we look forward to?
Right. So for people know, the book is Integrated Behavioral Health and Primary Care, Step-by-Step Guidance for Assessment and Intervention. And what we did, and it's myself, Jeff Goody, Mark Ort, and Ann Dobmeyer, and we wrote this book together. So the third edition has 18 chapters, and what we did is we updated all the references to incorporate what is the new research evidence on assessment and intervention, and how can we use that new evidence along with our clinical experience and practice to provide what we would consider, best practice recommendations. And with that, the third edition has over 400 new references, so that we wanted to make this the most up-to-date, clinician-focused book, so that people, to make it easy for people to assess and intervene in a way that's got some science behind it, but also isn't done in a vacuum. It also has real-world clinical experience and how you can think and adapt. And that book has, we updated recommendations for apps and websites and different books for different subject areas. There are also on the APA website, there are downloadable patient education materials that you can get that don't cost you anything else. And we encourage people to take those. And if you want to change them, put them in your own words. We have scripts for people to use as a baseline. We included a new chapter that is core competencies and clinical practice management skills. And so the other chapters are the same as in the previous books, but again, you think you're updating a book, but these books take a lot of time. I mean, we want these to be the best they can be, and we all would do different chapters as the lead, and then we'd share them and edit them between each other. And so just kind of my work alone, I probably spent over 250 hours from all the work to the final developmental piece. And APA has been great in this with developmental editors. They also sent it out to 3 peer reviewers, and those peer reviewers gave us, I think, really great feedback, and we made changes based on that. So we've tried to make this, I think this is the best edition we've done. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible, and include all the things that we think somebody who's starting out with this or wants to expand their scope of skills can take this and easily read it and be able to pull things out of it directly, from what questions do I ask? Why is this important? What screening measures should I use? What are the evidence-based interventions I can do with these people? Really to make it, I think about it, I like to cook, so I think about it as a recipe book. It's a place to start based on the best knowledge that we have from the science and the knowledge that the 4 of us have from our clinical work. And then you take that and you can start with that, and then you alter that recipe, or you add different ingredients based on what your patients are coming in with, what your system's like, what your goal is. It's a foundational place to start, but not kind of a one and done. Use it as a tool to help you do good work.
I am so freaking excited. In the availability, it comes out when?
Yeah, so it is the electronic version is available now on Kindle from Amazon, and the hard copy version is available for purchase and delivery starting January 2nd, 2024. So
And
soon.
we'll put in the link into the description of this video for people to go to be able to
Cool.
either get the electronic version or the hard copy one. It gets me so excited about so many different things. And again, every time I see Chris, I feel like I tell him this, but just I know how instrumental that book was for me starting out. And so I'm just super excited. One, that it's going to impact, there's another book now that's going to impact my development, and knowing how much this is going to impact the field and the benefit. It just, thank you for doing the work, man. That is just really, really, really cool. And a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, it's something that we think is important, and we hope, our ultimate goal is we hope that it makes a difference in how people are able to deliver like the best care they can. And like I said at the beginning, how can you help to change people's lives? And if I can
Wow.
be a small part of that, I mean, that time is certainly worth it, you know?
Incredibly powerful. So, Chris, as always, man, I appreciate you so much in the effort, the work, and always just being, as you've even said throughout here, so willing to share your knowledge and to connect with people, and so gracious with your time. So, thank you so much of that. And honestly, my mind's saying, really, just thank you for this moment of reflecting on a once in a universe career and really starting this like ripple in so many different people. So, my gratitude. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for asking me. It's been really fun to share. And if anybody would like to contact me, I can be reached at clhunter1313@gmail.com. And I'm happy to come back in the future and talk about whatever you think might be helpful or useful.
It might be a regular occurrence, man. But thank you for watching. As always, people comment, email, let us know where people's minds go and keep this conversation going. And definitely get your copy of the third edition of the book. But until next time, thanks.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it.